So we're going to look at another set of Christmas characters. Before we do that, though, I want to back into our time by asking you a question. This is a hypothetical, so don't shout out your answer out loud, okay? Happened last night. All right? Has there ever been a time where everyone thought you were wrong, but you were actually right? Has this ever happened to you? Has there ever been a time where everyone thought you were wrong, but you were actually right? I'm pretty sure this has only happened to me once in my life, and Josie is the one who had to remind me of this occasion because it happened when we were in college. When I was in college, we had this thing called J-term, okay? And this is where you would take one class for the month of January. And to be honest, most people use this as an opportunity to take a fun class so they could goof off for the entire month or a gen ed of some kind. So one J-term, I signed up for a class on forensics. All right? I needed a science cred, and so I thought, okay, that fits. And I love crime TV shows where you have to figure out who did it, like Castle. Any fans? Yeah? Who did it? I love those shows. And I'll be honest, there was a cute girl named Josie who had signed up for the class, and I kind of had a thing for her at the time, right? So I sign up for this class, I get in this class, and I quickly realize I'm the dumbest person in the room. Okay? I'm not kidding. You need to know, growing up, I was not a very good learner, okay, especially when it came to math and science. Throughout high school, I had to go in early most days of the week to get help with math homework. I struggled with the sciences, right? Chemistry, yuck. Physics, total struggle bus, okay? I was not good at the math and sciences. So I get into this class, and I quickly realize, as does everybody else, that I'm out of place. I'm surrounded by science majors, like physics major, chemistry major, pre-med students. I am the lone theology student. Everybody knows this, including the professor. The one thing I was able to do was consistently provide comedic relief, and that's why everybody enjoyed my presence there. The one skill set I had. So one day, the professor brought in a guest speaker to give a lecture on arson, fire, okay? This guy's life work was studying how fire spreads. Total nerd, okay? And he knew this. He knew he didn't have a personality, so he brought a stack of bumper stickers, and as a way to get people to engage, when he asked an answer and they got it right, he'd give out these bumper stickers, okay? So I got to confess to you, I really wanted one of those bumper stickers, real bad. The problem is, I had no way to get one because I had absolutely no clue what he was talking about, okay? So at one point, he throws out this really loaded, lofty question. I had no clue. It's the atomic weight of blah, blah, blah. And all I could discern is that the answer might be on the periodic table of elements, which happened to be right next to me. So I shoot my eyes over there, and I yell out the first thing I see. I go, carbon-14. And everybody around me, rolls their eyes. They had just the dumb, what do you know? And the guest speaker goes, who said that? And so I kind of I don't know what I've just done, so I kind of put my hand up, and he goes, young man, you're absolutely correct. Everybody's mouth, including the professor, jaw on the ground as I walk up to get my bumper sticker, all right? And just to prove it to you, here's a picture of it. There it is. If you want to stop arson, you just call this hotline and note, rewards are offered, okay? You might be asking, what in the world does this have to do with Christmas and where is this going? Well, believe it or not, this sets up our bottom line for today. If there's one thing, one idea you take away, let it be this. God will often use outsiders to give us insider information. God will often use outsiders, those outside of the faith, to give us insider information, insights into the things God's actually doing in the world. God will often use outsiders to give us insider information. Let's pray for open hearts and open minds today. Father God, we thank you that you gave the gift of your one and only Son for all of us. We thank you that your heart isn't for some, but it's for all, that when you took on flesh, you moved toward the entire world. When you spread your arms out on the cross, it was to embrace everyone. Give us your heart today. Remove our biases and our prejudices that block us from living in love towards everyone we encounter. For we ask it in Jesus' name. And all God's people said, Amen. All right, our passage for today comes from the Gospel of Matthew. This is Matthew 2, 1 through 12. Let me read it to you. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written." And this is from Micah 5:2. "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So at the center of this passage are a couple different contrasts between a few sets of characters. So follow me here. You've got a contrast between the Magi and the religious leaders. That's the first one. And then you've got a contrast between Herod and Jesus. That's the second one. And attending and digging into these contrasts is where the real force or punch of this passage is. So that's what I want to do today is I want to look at these contrasts. Here's the first one. The contrast between the Magi and the religious leaders. Let's look at the Magi. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." So you've got a group of people who are referred to as Magi. They come from the east to worship Jesus because of a star that they see in the sky. It's a little unusual, yeah? A little bizarre. So the question is, who are these Magi? Who are they? Well, notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't tell us how many there are, right? Most assume 3 because there were 3 gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But it doesn't say that. It doesn't tell us their names. So who are these Magi? Well, the Greek word for Magi here is magos. It's where we get our word magician from. And so the word magos literally means magician, sorcerer, or one wise at interpreting the stars. It's where we get our translation wise men from. One who's wise at interpreting the stars, wise men. But see, the problem with this wise men translation is it almost leaves us with the impression that this group is just a bunch of smart people. And that sort of misses the force or the weight of what's happening here. I did a lot of reading on this, and most commentators agree that the Magi were most likely pagan astrologers from Persia. At this time, astrology was considered a popular science, and the central hub, the capital for studying astrology, was in Persia. So these are most likely pagan astrologers from Persia. They're most likely very wealthy, and this is reflected in the gifts that they bring. They bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Not casseroles and diapers. Know what I mean? These are expensive gifts. These are wealthy individuals, and they likely had high standing. Because rulers and people in charge, when they were forced or encountered with a difficult decision, they'd often call on Magi to go, "What are the stars telling me that I should do?" Right? So pagan astrologers from Persia who are wealthy and had high standing. The point that I'm trying to make here is these aren't just smart people. They're Gentiles. And the thing that they practice, astrology, you need to know this, is something that the Old Testament forbids. In places like Deuteronomy 18 and Isaiah 2, it strictly prohibits and condemns the practice of astrology or trying to interpret the stars. So you guys start to feel the tension in this? You've got a group of people who travel considerable distance, right? Claiming to have insider information. The Messiah, the King of the Jews, has been born nearby. And how do they know this? By practicing the very thing that the Old Testament condemns. By trying to interpret and follow the stars. You've got a group of outsiders, pagan astrologers, Gentiles, who travel a considerable distance, claiming to have insider information. The King of the Jews, the Messiah, has been born nearby. You see the tension going on here? A group of outsiders claiming to have insider information. That's the Magi, and these are contrasted with the religious leaders. Picking up in verse 3, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied. So when King Herod hears this, he freaks out. All right? The translation disturbed doesn't probably capture Herod's response, because the thing you need to know is Herod was like a paranoid lunatic. He was half Jewish, not fully Jewish, and he was given the title King of the Jews by Rome. The way he got there was by placating Rome and serving their purposes. And especially towards the end of his life, he became increasingly paranoid about anybody who could take the throne away from him. And so he killed everyone in close proximity to him. He had sons killed. He had wives killed. He had some of his chief officers killed. Anybody who could possibly pose a threat to Herod, he had eliminated. Lunatic. So when he hears this, King of the Jews has been born, he's not excited, he's scared. There's another threat. So he calls the religious leaders together, the chief priests. The chief priests were the upper echelon of the priestly order. These were the guys who were in charge of all the priests in and around Jerusalem. And these men were likely selected by Herod himself to protect and preserve his power. So he calls them together and he calls the teachers of the law. These were scribes who were in charge of copying the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures. And because they spent so much time copying the scriptures, they would have become familiar with the scriptures, and so eventually they took on a teaching role. So you've got these religious leaders who come together, and Herod's going, what's this about? And together they confirm, the Messiah is supposed to be born in Bethlehem according to a prophecy in Micah 5:2. So again, if you're looking for a reason to believe in Jesus, know this: none of us controlled where we were born. And yet Jesus fulfills that prophecy. He was born in Bethlehem. So let's put it together. You've got a group of outsiders claiming to have insider information. These pagan astrologers come and they say the Messiah has been born nearby. Then you have the religious leaders who are looking at the scriptures and are confirming, yes, the Messiah is supposed to be born nearby according to a prophecy in Micah 5:2. And see, Bethlehem is 5 miles south of Jerusalem. It's not far away at all. It's really close by. So if you're reading this for the first time, if you're reading this story for the first time, you might ask, well, what happens next? Do they all stop what they're doing and go to Bethlehem? That's what you'd expect, right? They've just gotten news that the Messiah has been born. But what happens? Do the religious leaders go to Bethlehem? No. They stay right where they are. And the pagan astrologers go the final 5 miles by themselves. Friends, this is mind-boggling when you think about it. Persia is 1,200 miles away from Israel. You've got a group of pagan astrologers, outsiders, who travel 1,200 miles. That's weeks of travel, lots of hardship, 1,200 miles, bringing expensive gifts, following the uncertainty of a star in the sky. And you've got the religious leaders who aren't even willing to travel 5. Why? Why? Because their biases and their prejudice get in the way. You can imagine being in their shoes. We're the religious elite. We're the experts. We're the teachers of the law. What do you, pagan astrologers, you outsiders, know about the Messiah who's going to be given just for us? What do you know? But were they right or were they wrong? They miss it. These pagan astrologers have it right. Even though they live 1,200 miles away, they're more in tune with what God is doing than the religious leaders who are less than 5 miles away. And if you read the passage, you'll notice there's no critique, there's no criticism of the Magi here. There's no condemning their practice. In fact, if I'm reading this correctly, it would seem that God used the very thing that the Old Testament condemns to bring them to the feet of Jesus. But see, the religious leaders are so confident that they have a corner on God's truth, that they know what God's up to, that they understand how God operates, that they miss out on the single most significant event in all of human history. See, the difference between the Magi and the religious leaders is one of heart activation, not information. The religious leaders had more information. They literally had the scriptures telling them exactly where the Messiah was supposed to be born, and yet they refused to travel 5 miles to Bethlehem. These pagan astrologers have hardly anything. All they've got is a star in the sky. But because their hearts are open, they're willing to travel 1,200 miles, bring expensive gifts, and worship the newborn king. Yeah? That's the difference. It's about the state of your heart, and if you have a heart that's open to God, he'll do anything to draw you near to himself. Here's the point I'm getting after. We need to learn to expect that God works in unexpected ways. We need to learn to expect that God works in unexpected ways. This is a hard thing to do, but we got to expect the unexpected. And the reason why is because, well, this is what we see in Jesus. He was constantly doing things that were unexpected. He hung out with those you wouldn't expect. Outsiders, people on the margins, people with bad reputations, people everyone else looked down upon, sinners, tax collectors, prostitutes. Jesus said things you'd never expect him to say. At one point, he affirms a Roman centurion as having the greatest faith in all of Israel. That's like a slam. At another time, he elevates a Samaritan above a Levite and a priest. In another instance, he affirms the generosity of a broke widow over that of the Pharisees. I mean, Jesus was constantly doing things no one would expect and saying things you wouldn't expect him to say. Doing this all the time. And see, Jesus is God. Jesus reveals what God is like. And so if we just look at Jesus, we go, man, God is going to constantly do things we don't expect if we're open to it and have eyes to see it. This is one of the reasons why it's deeply concerning to me that Christians in general, but evangelical Christians in particular, have the reputation of being closed-minded. You ask people in the wider world and they'll tell you, yeah, Christians are closed-minded. We have the reputation of the religious leaders. Rather than being open to people who are different from us, we're known for just kind of hunkering together in our holy huddles and our Christian bubbles, assuming we have a corner on what God's doing, and we assume we know all there is to know, and we've got a corner on the truth, etc. And I'm telling you, that disposition is blocking us from identifying ways God is at work in the world. If we learn one thing from Jesus and one thing from the Christmas story, it's that God will often use outsiders to give us insider information. It'll upset our expectations. And if we're not open to it, we'll miss some of the most significant things he's doing. We live in a world where we're literally more connected than any other time in world history. Due to travel and technology, we have access. We're more connected than ever before. And yet, the propensity to surround ourselves with people who just look like us and think like us and act like us and believe like us is so strong. Why? Because I can choose. I can choose who I listen to. I can listen to this news station and not that one. I can read these blogs and not those ones. And if you're not careful, you just surround yourself with people who reinforce who you are. And you'll miss out on some of the greatest things God is doing around you if that's your disposition. We need to move towards people and be open to people who are very different from us. We need to build relationships with people who aren't like us. And I'm not talking about friendship evangelism here, where we sort of use friendship as a tool to serve some evangelistic goal. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about moving toward people who are different than you with the primary goal of building mutual, reciprocal relationships. Here's the kinds of people I'm talking about. We need to build relationships with the homeless. And not because we think it's our job to save or rescue them, but because they hold open an invitation to deep friendship. Right now we have a kingdom community called Hands for Hope, and they go to Milwaukee every Saturday. And their primary goal is to simply serve hot chocolate to the homeless and build friendships. And if you talk to anybody who's engaging this work, they're not going to tell you stories of how they rescued people from poverty. They're going to tell you about friendships that have been formed and ways that God is transforming them in the process. We've got a group, another kingdom community that goes to Bread and Roses in Watertown on Thursday afternoons. And they'll tell you stories of friendships that have formed and the transformation they've experienced in their own life as they've leaned into this. We need to build relationship with the homeless. We need to build relationships with those of different races and ethnicity. Friends, our brothers and sisters of different color have so much to teach us if we'll lean in and listen and learn. We need to move towards those of a different socioeconomic status. Lake Country is actually an incredibly diverse place socioeconomically. And if you just hang out with people who make the same amount of money as you and live in homes like you, I'm telling you, you're missing out on a whole spectrum of relationships that will open up your eyes to the things God is doing. We need to build relationships with those who have special needs, and not as a charity project. I'm blessed to have a son who has Down syndrome, and every day it's like unwrapping a gift that God has given to me. It's not a charity project. He holds open an invitation to friendship. We need to move towards the LGBTQ community. Here's a community where there's so much hurt and pain, and we're a big cause of that. And our primary orientation needs to be one of love. Moving towards them, holding out an invitation for real friendship. We need to move towards those who don't yet follow Jesus. Man, if you're here today and you don't have an actual friendship with someone who doesn't yet follow Jesus, I encourage you to start developing one. And again, not with the primary goal of converting them. That's like a bait and switch kind of thing, and they'll sniff that out from like a mile away. They smell it coming. It doesn't smell good. All right? Not to say you shouldn't present the gospel to people. I'm not saying that. But I'm telling you, the context for sharing the good news is genuine friendship when you're actually committed to them. And their response isn't like, your friendship isn't conditioned upon their response. Man, it does bad work if you just befriend someone to try to get them to a goal and then you move on to the next project when it doesn't work out. It's doing bad work. We need to avoid the trap of the religious leaders, where we assume we have a corner on what God's doing, we have all truth, and we become closed off to the things God might be doing beyond our comprehension. See, if that's our attitude and that's our disposition, we could miss out on the single most important stuff God is doing right around us. Came across this tweet this week. Bob Goff said, God often uses the least qualified but most available people to get things done. That's it. Least qualified but most available. Availability matters more than qualification. All right, so that's the first contrast. The second contrast is between Jesus and Herod, and this brings us to the heart of Christmas. Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and then we've come to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go worship him. See, at the center of this passage is a contrast between kings. You've got King Herod, a false king sitting on the throne. A false king who's only half Jewish. A false king who's politicked his way to the top. A false king whose kingship was given to him and inaugurated by Rome. A false king who constantly is using people, who's all about power grabbing and using people to build his empire. We see it in this passage. I mean, in verse 7 and 8, you can already see him. How do I manipulate and control the Magi to serve my purpose? You go and worship and then tell me where he is so I can go worship, worship the king, right? He's already maneuvering and manipulating and controlling. This is who he is. He's all about power grabbing and using his power to control other people. He's all about selfish ambition. How can I use people to build me, my empire, my goals? These are the characteristics of his kingship: power over, cruelty, manipulation, coercion, selfish ambition. You've got a false king sitting on the throne, and this false king is contrasted with the real king of the Jews, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And see, the real king, King Jesus, he's not a half Jew, he's fully Jewish. And he didn't get to the top by politicking his way there. No. Notice the question the Magi ask when they come. They go, where's the one born king of the Jews? They don't ask, where's the one who's going to become king of the Jews? They ask, where's the one who's born king of the Jews? Jesus didn't become king of the Jews. He was born king of the Jews. He didn't politic his way to the top. He was born on top. And his kingship wasn't given to him by Rome. It was given to him by God Almighty. Like, no human being can touch his status. It was given to him by his Father in heaven. And see, whereas Herod is all about power and using people, in Jesus you see a God who expresses all the power in the world by becoming a powerless infant. You see the difference? Herod is about manipulation and coercion in order to get his goals met. And because of that, he oppresses people. But see, Jesus came to set the captives free, to free people from oppression. Whereas Herod's all about selfish ambition, Jesus is about self-sacrificial love. The contrast couldn't be clearer. So let's put this together. Stay with me. The contrast between Jesus and Herod reveals who God is. Reveals who God is. The Christmas story reveals a God who expresses his omnipotent power through self-sacrificial love, who flexes his omnipotent muscles by becoming a helpless infant. This is what the Christmas story reveals. A God who has all the power in the world, he becomes a humble, helpless infant. He takes on flesh. And it's not about selfish ambition, it's about self-sacrificial love. This God who is born a helpless infant will eventually go to the cross and die for the sins of the world in order to restore, to redeem, and reconcile. This is who God is. The contrast between Jesus and Herod reveals who God is, and the contrast between the Magi and the religious leaders reveal who God is for. Who God is for. He's not a God who's just for some. This isn't a just for us kind of a thing. It's a son is given for all of us. This is a God who takes on flesh in the most humble of ways, who goes to the cross and gives his life for every single person who has breath. Reveals a God who is for us, not against us. And this is illustrated by the fact that he draws a group of pagan astrologers from 1,200 miles away who are simply willing to follow a star to a manger. For unto us a son is given for all of us. Here's some ways you might think about responding to the message today. The first is this: you could go the distance to see Jesus. You could go with the pagan astrologers all the way to Bethlehem rather than stay in Jerusalem where the religious leaders are. What I'm getting at is maybe you're here today and you've never given your life to Jesus. There's something holding you back. You've kind of been hanging out in Jerusalem for a while, and you sense God's working in your heart and your life. Well, I'm telling you, don't ignore that. Journey the 5-mile distance and give your life to Jesus. Do it. This is a God who took on flesh for you out of love. This is a God who's for you. He's not against you. He's your advocate. He's not your accuser. And he laid down his life for you and ultimately rose victoriously on your behalf to give you what you can't give yourself. And all you've got to do is say, I'm in. Thank you for doing this. And I want to start following you today. Secondly, you can get to know someone different from you. We will miss out on some of the things God is doing around us if we're closed-minded. If we assume we have a corner on the truth, if we just hunker down in our holy huddles and our Christian bubbles, this week, stretch yourself. Get to know someone different than you. Listen longer than it feels comfortable. Yeah? All right.